Hi there, Econ 421 class. I'm having a lot of technical difficulties trying to upload these videos to YouTube, so I'm going to shorten them. Maybe that will relieve some of the problems that we're having. So let's get started. Chapter 9, Part 1. This is on human capital, dealing with education and training. And the hat du jour is actually a New York Mets hat. And when I went to buy it in 2015 in New York, it was unbelievably difficult. For every 100 places where you could buy a Yankees hat, I had to find a hidden New York Mets store in Manhattan, and that was the only place back then that you can find this. Then, of course, they made it to the World Series that year, so probably got to be a little bit easier. So, why are we here in this class? Well, the primary reason that we're here and we're at CSUN and getting an education is for us to be able to enhance our learning. Not only our learning, I mean our earnings going forward. Obviously, the learning leads to the earning. And we talk back in chapter 3 and 4 and 5 and even 2 that people are paid based on the value of their marginal product of labor, and enhancing your education is one way to enhance your marginal productivity. Clearly, it doesn't happen magically, but we can certainly make some generalizations as we go through. And clearly, investing in yourself is one of the most important investments that somebody can make. As always, when we're looking at the education decision, there are trade-offs involved, no surprise. We've got benefits, we've got costs. One of the obvious benefits is going to be the prospect of higher earnings. There's no surprise there, and I will show you data from the Census Bureau for 2018 that is going to illustrate that in a very clear fashion. But that's not the only reason that we pursue higher levels of education. It may enable us to do something we really like and generate some sort of utility for us, even if it doesn't translate directly into higher earnings. If you think about it and how you're trying to map out your career, not that many of you are focused simply on what's going to make me the most money with no other considerations. Obviously, it's more like a balancing act between that and other things that are important to you. So there are clearly people who go on to get, for example, a PhD that enables them to be a professor, maybe at a small liberal arts college somewhere. The pay's not going to be that high. If it's not a business-related or science discipline, the likelihood of their earnings prospects is probably below average for someone with that level of education, but they like that kind of environment, okay? And I think back going, maybe 12 years ago, to a student in labor economics who happened to be a medieval art major, the one and only that I've ever been able to find that took one of my classes. And we got to talking, why are you majoring this? It's what she likes. It's what interests her, and it's not that, this is where I'm going to make the most money. No, this is where she's going to get pleasure. Okay, that's a benefit side. The cost side are going to include some obvious things and some items that are not so obvious. We could put them into 3 buckets. The first one will be the out-of-pocket expenditures: tuition, books, transportation, other directly school-related fees. Beware, room and board is not an out-of-pocket expense for college. Maybe if you want to look at the marginal additional expense of eating in the dorms versus eating at home, living in the dorms versus the opportunity cost of the value of your room at home or whatever, fine. But room and board by itself overstates the cost of college because you still have to live somewhere and you still have to eat. Okay. That's bucket number 1, out of pockets. Bucket number 2 are going to be the foregone earnings. The foregone earnings will be what you could have earned if, instead of going on to college, you went to work directly out of high school. Or for those of you who got an AA degree before going to CSUN, what could you have earned with that degree versus what you expect to earn having the full-blown bachelor's degree? So that's a clear opportunity cost analysis and very important to the decision as to whether or not to invest in additional education. And that's why sometimes really high earners decide not to go on to any further schooling later on in life. Or if they do, you get an MBA going at night. So your earnings, which may be pretty significant if you're well into your career, are not going to be impacted much at all as you expand on your education. And the third bucket, the one that may not be so obvious, are the psychic costs associated with learning. Some of you may just love being in college and you get a certain joy out of learning and you maybe have a really good aptitude for it. College is not that much torture. That's one thing, and that makes you more likely to go on to school because one of the costs associated with obtaining more education is pretty low for you. For others, where learning is a drag and it doesn't come to you so easily and you have to work really hard, that may lead you to say, one and done. When I get my bachelor's degree, I'm not going to go on for any further education. Okay. So we've got these costs that we've identified. We've got the benefits, which clearly can be most easily measured in terms of higher earnings, but we recognize there's also a utility benefit to doing something that you may be more inclined to simply enjoy doing. But the costs are basically incurred now, and the benefits are received way into the future. Let's say you graduate high school at 18, you start college, you get out in 4 or 5 years, you're 22 or 23, you're going to reap the benefits of higher education for another 40, 45 years. And there, it makes sense because it's so far in the distance that we need to bring it back into present value. So the way that we would illustrate that would be in this very simple comparison between the present value of the benefits on the one hand and the three elements of cost that we identified on the other hand. The benefits here would be the benefit in period I, which starts from I equals 1 all the way up to some terminal date, capital T, where you're going to retire. And that would be discounted by 1 plus the discount rate R to the ith power so that we get the present value of the future benefits. Obviously, benefits to be earned 30 or 40 years from now don't have as high a present value as the benefits to be earned over the next several years. And as long as that is greater than the cost, then investing in additional education is efficient. It makes sense. Okay. So how do we illustrate this trade-off, and what do we ultimately do with it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a diagram, really important diagram. I've modified the one in the book a little bit to illustrate this, so let me show you exactly the trade-off just in a more visual way. So we've got earnings on the vertical axis. We've got age on the horizontal axis, and the origin is going to, the 0 point for earnings may be associated with an age origin point at 18, 17, 16, depending whenever you graduated from school. Or maybe you decided not to go to college right away, and maybe you're 21 years old, you went into the military, whatever the starting point is that's relevant for you, taking it all the way out to some expected retirement date in the future. Okay, so the cost that we identified, item Z here, this box here, which is below the horizontal axis, so it's going to be a negative number, will reflect the out-of-pocket cost associated with going to college. Y would be the opportunity cost associated with going to college. Why? How so? Because profile 1 here would be a representation of your earnings profile if you simply went and got a job right out of high school instead of going on and pursuing college. And you can see you've got positive earnings, but they flatten out pretty quickly because with only a high school degree, it limits clearly your options and the number of jobs that you could pursue in the future. If you go on to college, at the corner point here, be this 4 or 5 years or whatever, this is when you graduate, and then your earnings, of course, are going to shoot up, and you have this earnings profile 2 that we talk about, and it could be a discrete jump. It may start, right here. It could start even higher than the high school earnings, but doesn't have to initially because you already have a head start on experience going straight out of high school. But clearly you're going to overtake the high school earnings, and X represents the distance between profile 2 and profile 1. And this is what we take to present value to make the determination of whether or not it makes sense to pursue additional education. Okay, we'll pick up on this in part 2.